Let us travel back to a small market town in Norfolk, England. The year is 1737. The morning mist hangs low over the River Ouse, softening the edges of the Georgian brick buildings. Smoke curls gently from a few chimneys into the still, gray sky. The air is quiet, broken only by the distant call of a blackbird and the soft clop of a single horse's hooves on damp cobblestones. This is Thetford, a place of modest routines and quiet industry. It is here, in a simple house on Bridge Street, that our story begins. The house is not grand. It is built of timber and plaster, with a steeply pitched roof of thatch. The windows are small, their glass panes wavy and imperfect. Inside, the main room is warmed by a hearth where a fire burns low. The light is amber and flickering, casting long, dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls. The smell of bread baking and wood smoke fills the air. This is the home of Joseph Paine, a staymaker, and his wife Frances. Their life is one of careful craftsmanship and measured days. Joseph Paine's workshop is a space of ordered calm. Bundles of whalebone and linen thread are arranged neatly on a wide wooden bench. A finished corset, or stay, lies waiting, its intricate stitching a testament to patient skill. The light from a tallow candle illuminates the fine work. Joseph's hands are steady and sure. This trade requires precision, a quiet attention to detail that shapes a garment meant to provide subtle support. The rhythm of his work is a soft, repetitive sound, the pull of thread through stiff material, the gentle tap of a tool. It is in this atmosphere of quiet diligence that young Thomas Paine spends his early years. He watches his father's hands. He learns the names of tools. He absorbs the value of a thing well made, an idea carefully formed. The town of Thetford itself holds a quiet history. The ruins of a great medieval priory stand at its edge, their stone arches open to the sky. Young Thomas would have walked past these ruins, their grandeur fading back into the earth. Sheep graze peacefully in the long grass that grows between the fallen stones. The silence there is profound, broken only by the wind. It is a place that whispers of time passing, of empires and beliefs that have risen and fallen. These walks would have given the boy a sense of perspective, a feeling for the long arc of history. The surrounding countryside is gentle and rolling. Fields are divided by low stone walls and hedgerows. The sky is often a vast canopy of soft, moving clouds. It is a landscape that encourages contemplation, not haste. Thomas attended the Thetford Grammar School for a few years. The schoolroom was a simple, austere place. Wooden desks, worn smooth by generations of students, faced a large fireplace. The light came from high, narrow windows. He learned to read and write and was taught Latin. But his formal education ended when he was just 13. This was the custom for boys of his station. They were expected to learn a trade, to contribute to the household. So, Thomas began an apprenticeship with his father. His world contracted to the dimensions of the workshop. Yet, his mind continued to wander. In the evenings, by the dim light of the hearth, he would read what books he could find. The pages would be turned slowly. The words were a window to a world far beyond the quiet streets of Thetford. As a young man, Thomas tried his hand at various occupations. He went to sea for a brief, tumultuous time, but found no lasting calling there. He returned to England and tried his father's trade as a staymaker. He even opened a shop of his own in Sandwich. But a restlessness had taken root. His thoughts were increasingly occupied by the new ideas circulating in the coffee houses and pamphlets of the age. The concepts of liberty, reason, and the rights of man were like seeds finding fertile ground. He began to write, formulating his own thoughts in quiet moments. His sentences were direct, his arguments clear. He sought to make complex ideas accessible, to speak not to scholars in their towers, but to ordinary people in their homes and workshops. The turning point came in London, in the autumn of 1774. Thomas Paine, now 37, was introduced to Benjamin Franklin. The meeting likely took place in a quiet study or a book-lined room. Franklin, a renowned thinker and representative of the American colonies, saw something in the earnest former staymaker. He recognized a powerful mind and a plain, persuasive way with words. Franklin provided Paine with letters of introduction. They were a key to a new world. With little more than hope and these letters, Paine decided to sail for Philadelphia. He left behind the gentle, familiar landscape of England. He set his course for the bustling colonies, carrying with him the quiet convictions formed in Thetford's workshops and on its contemplative walks. A new chapter was about to begin, far across the Atlantic Ocean. The journey began in the grey chill of an English October. The ship, a merchant vessel named the London Packet, was anchored in the Thames. Its masts reached like bare trees into the overcast sky. The deck was a scene of orderly activity. Sailors coiled thick ropes with practiced ease. Barrels of fresh water and salted provisions were carefully stowed below. The air smelled of tar, damp wood, and the brackish scent of the river. Thomas Paine stood on the deck, watching the final preparations. His belongings were few: a trunk containing clothes, some books, and the precious letters from Franklin. He carried the hopes of a man starting over, a quiet anticipation for what lay ahead. For the first few days, the ship sailed down the English Channel. The coastline of England slowly receded, becoming a faint, green line on the horizon. Then there was only the open sea. The world simplified to the creak of the ship's timbers, the billow of its canvas sails, and the endless, shifting plains of water. The light on the ocean was extraordinary. At dawn, the sky would blush a soft pink and gold, reflecting on the waves in 1,000 glittering points. At noon, the sun could be brilliant, making the sea a deep, luminous blue. Evenings brought long, lavender shadows and a profound stillness as the wind often died down. Life aboard ship followed a steady, maritime rhythm. The captain kept a strict watch, navigating by sun and stars. For the passengers, time passed in a quiet, suspended state. Paine spent hours reading in his small cabin, a cramped space lit by a swaying lantern. The light would swing gently with the roll of the ship, casting moving shadows on the wooden walls. He wrote in his journal, recording thoughts and observations. The constant motion of the sea was a lulling presence. The sound of water rushing along the hull was a perpetual whisper, a companion to solitude and thought. Weeks passed. The weather turned. The North Atlantic in late autumn was a formidable force. Great gray waves rose around the ship, their tops whipped into froth by the wind. The sky became a low, oppressive ceiling of cloud. Yet, even in this, there was a terrible majesty. Paine would have witnessed the power of nature from the relative safety of the deck or his cabin. The ship, though tossed, was sturdy. The crew worked with a calm competence, their shouts barely audible over the roar of the storm. It was a reminder of human fragility, but also of resilience. After the storm passed, an immense calm would settle. The sea smoothed into gentle swells, and a breathtaking clarity filled the air. The voyage was not without hardship. An outbreak of typhoid fever, known then as ship fever, swept through the crowded quarters below deck. 5 passengers died. It was a time of fear and solemnity. The ill were tended as best they could be. The dead were committed to the deep in simple, somber ceremonies at sunset. Paine himself fell gravely ill. For days, he lay in his bunk, burning with fever, listening to the groan of the ship. His recovery was slow. It was during this convalescence, in the quiet of his cabin, that he had ample time to reflect on life, mortality, and the new society he hoped to join. After 8 long weeks at sea, a cry came from the crow's nest, land. The coast of America appeared as a dark, smudged line on the western horizon. As the ship drew closer, details emerged: the gentle curve of a bay, the dark green of pine forests, the first sight of wooden wharves and church steeples. The air changed, carrying the scent of earth and wood smoke, a smell profoundly different from the salty sea air. The London Packet sailed into the Delaware River, making its way toward Philadelphia. The riverbanks were lined with autumnal trees, their leaves glowing in the late afternoon sun. The water was busy with smaller boats, sloops, dinghies, and ferries, going about their daily tasks. It was a scene of peaceful industry. On November 30th, 1774, the ship docked. Paine, still weak from his illness, stepped onto American soil. The wharf was a bustling place, but to him, It must have felt solid and reassuring after months of constant motion. He looked around at the brick and wooden buildings of the port, the people moving with purpose, the carts laden with goods. The light was the golden light of a Pennsylvania late autumn. It slanted through the spaces between buildings, illuminating the dust in the air. He had arrived with nothing but his intellect and his letters. Yet, in that moment, standing on the busy quay, he was where he needed to be. A new life, in a new world, was about to unfold. Philadelphia in 1774 was a city of brick and ambition. Its streets, laid out in a sensible grid, were wide and shaded by young trees. The buildings were mostly of red brick with white trim and pitched roofs. Morning light would catch the facades, turning them a warm rose gold. The city hummed with a quiet, purposeful energy. Artisans in their workshops, merchants in their counting houses, printers setting type. This was a society built on work and thought. The air carried a melange of smells: baking bread, brewing beer, the tang of hot metal from a smithy, and the dry, clean scent of paper and ink from the many print shops. Paine found lodging in a modest boarding house. His room was simple: a bed, a chair, a small writing desk by a window. From that window, he could watch the life of the city unfold. Carts rumbled by, laden with farm produce. Women carried baskets to the market. Children played in the alleys. It was a daily panorama of ordinary life. He spent his first weeks recovering his strength and presenting his letters of introduction. One letter led him to the shop of Robert Aitken, a bookseller and printer. Aitken, impressed by Paine's clear mind and writing, offered him a position editing a new publication, the Pennsylvania Magazine. The print shop became Paine's new workshop. It was a place of fascinating industry. The main room was dominated by a large wooden printing press. Typecases lined the walls, their hundreds of tiny compartments holding leaden letters. The light was good, streaming in from large windows to illuminate the precise work. Compositors stood at their frames, selecting letters with quick, practiced movements to form lines of text. The air was fragrant with the smells of ink and paper. The sound was a gentle, rhythmic clatter, the tapping of type into place, the creak of the press lever, the whisper of a page being turned. It was a world away from the staymaker's bench, yet it shared the same ethos of careful craftsmanship. Paine threw himself into his editorial work. He wrote articles on science, on social issues, against the injustice of slavery. His writing was direct and forceful, yet always aimed at the common reader. He would often work late into the evening. In the quiet of the shop after the journeyman had left, only the light of a single candle would illuminate his desk. The shadow of his quill would dance across the paper as he wrote. Outside, the sounds of the city would gradually fade into a peaceful nighttime stillness. These were the hours when his thoughts crystallized, when he refined his arguments for liberty and self-governance. Beyond his work, Paine explored the intellectual life of the city. He visited coffee houses, not the noisy taverns of legend, but places of serious discussion. In a quiet corner of the London coffee house, men would gather to talk of politics and philosophy. The atmosphere was smoky, warm, and cerebral. Paine listened more than he spoke at first. He absorbed the tensions of the colonies, the debates over rights and representation. He heard the grievances against distant Parliament, but also the hope for a new kind of society. These conversations, held over cups of coffee in the soft glow of oil lamps, were the forge where his ideas were tempered. He also walked the city's outskirts. Philadelphia was bordered by gentle countryside. Paine would stroll along the Schuylkill River, where willow trees dipped their branches into the slow-moving water. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the path. He saw farmers working their fields, their movements slow and deliberate. The landscape spoke of productivity and peace. It was a society that seemed to work, where a man's labor could yield its own reward. This vision of America as a place of potential, of industry free from ancient burdens, deeply affected him. It contrasted sharply with the entrenched hierarchies he had known in England. As 1775 began, tensions with Great Britain increased. Yet, Philadelphia's daily rhythms continued. The city's life was a tapestry of ordinary moments. A woman buying fabric at a draper's shop. A schoolmaster leading his students in a lesson. A gardener tending to the plants in a backyard. Paine observed it all. He began to see that the real strength of the colonies lay not in an army, but in these people, in their capacity for hard work, their love of family, and their simple desire to govern their own lives. His pen became his tool, just as his father's all had been. He was no longer just an observer or an editor. He was preparing to become a voice, to articulate a simple, powerful truth that would soon echo through every quiet street and comfortable home in the colonies. The winter of 1775 to 1776 was a time of suspended animation. In Philadelphia, the air was cold and crisp. Snow dusted the cobblestone streets, muffling the sounds of the city. Inside the print shop, however, the atmosphere was warm with the heat from a small stove and the focus of intense thought. Thomas Paine sat for long hours at his desk. Before him lay blank sheets of paper, an inkwell, and a tray of sharpened quills. His task was immense, to explain, in the clearest terms possible, why the American colonies must seek independence. He called his work Common Sense. The title itself was a declaration. It was an appeal not to kings or generals, but to the everyday logic of farmers, shopkeepers, and artisans. He wrote in a plain, vigorous style. He stripped away the ornate language of the time. He wanted every sentence to be understood by the candlelight in a farmhouse, by the fire in a tavern. Society in every state is a blessing, he wrote, but government even in its best state is but a necessary evil. He challenged the very idea of monarchy and hereditary succession, calling it an absurdity. He painted a vision of a new, representative government born from the consent of the people. His words were not shouted, they were stated with the firm, calm conviction of something self-evident. The scratching of his quill was the only sound in the quiet room. The physical manuscript grew page by page. Paine's handwriting was neat and deliberate. He made few corrections, for the arguments had been forming in his mind for months. He drew on everything he had seen and learned, the quiet oppression in Thetford, the vast potential of the American landscape, the reasonable discussions in Philadelphia's coffeehouses. He synthesized complex political philosophy into powerful, memorable phrases. "The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind," he wrote. He was not just drafting a pamphlet, he was giving voice to a silent, gathering consensus. When the manuscript was complete, it was taken to the printing press of Robert Bell. The typesetting was a meticulous process. Each tiny metal letter was placed by hand into a composing stick. The printers worked with quiet concentration, transforming Paine's handwritten words into lines of lead type. The type was then locked into a frame or formie and carefully inked. The first proof sheets were pulled from the press. Paine would have examined them under the lamplight, checking for errors. The words, now in crisp, black type on creamy paper, looked even more authoritative. They were ready to be multiplied, to be sent out into the world. On January 10, 1776, Common Sense was published anonymously. The first edition was a modest pamphlet of 47 pages. It sold for 2 shillings. Robert Bell placed a stack of them in the window of his shop on 3rd Street. The plain, unassuming cover bore only the title. There was no dramatic announcement. It simply appeared as if it had always been there, waiting to be read. The early winter light would have fallen on that stack of pamphlets, a simple pile of paper that contained a revolutionary idea. A few curious customers purchased copies. They took them home, unfolded the pages, and began to read by their hearthsides. The printing press worked steadily. Its rhythmic thump the heartbeat of dissemination. More editions were quickly needed. The demand was not a roar, but a steadily rising murmur. Printers in other cities, Boston, New York, Charleston, requested copies of the text to reprint. The ideas began to travel along the post roads, carried by riders in saddlebags. They crossed rivers on ferries. They were passed from hand to hand. Paine had foregone any royalties, insisting the pamphlet be as affordable as possible. His goal was not profit, but propagation. He wanted the argument for independence to be as accessible as the title promised. And so it was. The quiet work of the quill and the press was beginning to ripple outward into the heart of a nation waiting to be born. The impact of Common Sense was not like a sudden explosion. It was more like a slow, steady sunrise, illuminating a landscape that had been shrouded in doubt. The pamphlet was read in quiet places. In a farmhouse on the Pennsylvania frontier, a family would gather after supper. The father would hold the pamphlet close to a candle, his finger tracing the lines as he read aloud. The children listened, perhaps not understanding every political point, but feeling the gravity in their father's voice. The words spoke of a future they could build themselves. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. The world outside was dark and still, but inside, a new idea was taking light. In the meeting houses of New England, men discussed Paine's arguments after Sunday service. They stood in small groups, their breath visible in the cold air, the pamphlet passed from hand to hand. The language was so clear, so free from scholarly pretense, that it felt like one of their own was speaking. It validated their own inchoate feelings of grievance and hope. A shopkeeper in Boston might read a passage to his apprentice as they closed up for the evening. A ship's captain in Newport might pore over it in his cabin before sleep. The words traveled on the coastal packets that carried mail and goods, moving from port to port with the tides. George Washington had copies read to his troops encamped around Boston. Imagine the scene: soldiers, weary from drill and watch, gathered around campfires as an officer with a clear voice read Paine's stirring conclusions. The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. The voice would carry on the night air. The words spoke of their sacrifice in terms of universal human destiny. It gave a deeper meaning to their cold and hardship. The firelight would flicker on their attentive faces. This was not just a dispute about taxes. It was a chance to begin the world over again. The silence after the reading would be profound, filled with the weight of the idea. The pamphlet sold astonishingly well, over 100,000 copies in a few months, a number staggering for the time. But its true power was in its copying and sharing. Passages were reprinted in newspapers. Sermons echoed its themes. Conversations in taverns and town squares were shaped by its logic. It provided a common vocabulary for independence. Where before there had been hesitation and loyalty to the crown, Common Sense offered a clear, compelling alternative. It made the unthinkable, breaking with the mighty British Empire, seem not only thinkable, but necessary and right. It did this not with calls to arms, but with calls to reason. Paine, still largely anonymous, continued his life in Philadelphia. He walked the same streets, worked in the same print shop. But he could sense the change in the atmosphere. People spoke with more certainty. The debates in the Continental Congress grew more decisive. His own identity as the author gradually became known, but he sought no glory. He donated the profits from later editions to buy mittens for Washington's soldiers. For him, the words were the important thing, not the man who wrote them. He saw his work as a service, a tool provided for the public use. He remained a quiet figure in a bustling city, observing the consequences of his plain-spoken arguments. As spring of 1776 arrived, the ideas from Common Sense began to bear tangible fruit. In provincial assemblies and the Continental Congress, resolutions for independence were drafted. The language in these documents often reflected the clear, declarative style of Paine's pamphlet. The philosophical groundwork had been laid for a public declaration. When Thomas Jefferson sat down in a rented room on Market Street in Philadelphia to draft the Declaration of Independence, he was writing for an audience that had already been prepared. They had been educated by a former staymaker from Thetford in the common sense of self-governance. The quiet reading by countless candlelights had created a collective readiness. The nation was not yet born, but its intellectual foundations were now solid, built word by word, page by page, in the peaceful hours of evening. The war for independence was won. A new nation was established. Thomas Paine's role, however, did not end. He served the cause in various ways, even authoring a series of pamphlets called The American Crisis to bolster morale in dark times. But as the years passed, the fierce controversies of revolution gave way to the slower work of building a country. Paine himself journeyed to Europe in the 1780s, becoming involved in the intellectual ferment of the French Revolution. He wrote The Rights of Man in defense of republican principles. Yet, his unwavering radicalism eventually led to imprisonment in France and a narrow escape from the guillotine. These were turbulent years, far from the peaceful scenes we focus on here. He returned to America in 1802, an older man, his health declining. The America he returned to was different, more settled, more politically contentious. He was welcomed by some, but vilified by others for his later writings on religion. Seeking peace, he eventually settled on a farm given to him by the state of New York for his services during the Revolution. This farm was in New Rochelle, a quiet, pastoral community north of New York City. The house was a modest, two-story wooden structure, painted white, with a view of rolling fields and stands of oak and maple. Here, he hoped to find the quiet he had known in his youth. His daily routine was simple and solitary. He would rise late, his nights often troubled by illness. The main room of the house was sparsely furnished, a table, some chairs, many books. Sunlight would stream through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He spent hours reading and writing letters to old friends like Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe. His handwriting, once so firm, was now more tremulous. The arguments were still sharp, but the physical act of writing was a labor. He would pause often, looking out at the tranquil landscape, watching the seasons turn. The farm itself was managed by others, but Paine took solace in the land. On good days, he would walk with a cane along the property's boundaries. He watched farmers in the distance bringing in the hay. He saw the apple trees in his orchard bloom in the spring, a cloud of white and pink against the green grass. In the autumn, those same trees would be heavy with fruit, and the maple leaves would blaze with color. The rhythms of nature were a constant, gentle comfort. They were far removed from the heated debates of legislatures and the ink-stained world of pamphleteering. Visitors were few. Occasionally, a curious traveler or an old admirer would make the journey from the city to see the famous author of Common Sense. These meetings were quiet affairs. They would sit in the main room, tea growing cold, and talk of old times and new ideas. Paine, though frail, could still spark with intelligence when discussing principles of government or scientific inquiry. But more often, the conversations would lapse into comfortable silence, both parties content to watch the shadows lengthen across the wooden floor. The world was moving on, and he was content to observe it from this gentle distance. His final years were marked by increasing isolation and physical discomfort. Yet, there was a peace to his surroundings that could not be denied. The light in New Rochelle had a particular quality, soft and golden, especially in the late afternoon. It would fall across his bed, where he spent more and more time. He could hear the sounds of the farm, a cow lowing, the call of a crow, the wind in the trees. These were the sounds of an ordinary, enduring world. On June 8, 1809, Thomas Paine died in this house, with only a few friends at his bedside. His passing was as quiet as the title of his most famous work. He was buried on his farm, in a corner of the property. The grave was simple, marked only by a small stone. For years, it was a quiet, almost forgotten spot. The grass grew around it. Wildflowers bloomed in the spring. It was a fitting end for a man who believed so fiercely in the common people and the common earth. The grand monuments would come later, erected by later generations who understood his impact. But in those immediate years, his resting place was a part of the landscape he had loved, a peaceful, unassuming patch of ground under the wide American sky, where the only sounds were the wind and the birds, and the only legacy was the enduring power of the words he left behind. Time moves softly over the landscapes of history. The cobblestone streets of Thetford are still there, though quieter now. The print shops of Philadelphia are long gone, replaced by buildings of glass and steel. Yet, the ideas that were formed in those places have a lasting presence. They are not carved in stone in the way of statues, but in the patterns of thought and the structures of government. Thomas Paine's legacy is like that, less a monument to a man and more a foundation for a way of thinking. It is a belief in the power of plain talk, in the ability of ordinary people to understand their world and shape their destiny. Today, you can visit places touched by his life. In New Rochelle, a larger monument now stands over his reinterred remains. It is a simple obelisk in a quiet cemetery. The stone is weathered, the inscription worn but still legible. On a sunny day, light filters through the branches of old trees, creating a pattern of light and shadow on the grass around it. It is a peaceful spot, often visited by those who wish to pay quiet respects. The noise of the modern world feels distant here. It is a place for reflection, not for celebration of battles, but for contemplation of ideas. In museums, you might see an original copy of Common Sense. It is usually displayed under glass, protected from light and time. The paper is yellowed, the ink faded to a soft brown. The typeface is clear and bold. To look at it is to see a physical artifact of a moment when thought became action. It is a quiet object, unassuming in its vitrine. Yet, it holds within its lines the seismic shift of a century. Visitors pass by, some pausing to read a displayed excerpt. The words still resonate, a quiet echo from a time of great change. His ideas traveled far beyond the shores of America. They influenced reformers and writers across Europe and the world. The notion that government derives its power from the consent of the governed became a bedrock principle for emerging democracies. This was not spread by conquest, but by the peaceful means of the printed word, translated into dozens of languages, read in studies and parlors across the globe. The ripple that began with a single pamphlet in a Philadelphia shop extended outward in ever-widening circles, touching lives and inspiring movements in a quiet, persistent way. We remember Thomas Paine not for the drama of his life, which had its share of tumult, but for the clarity of his conviction in quieter moments. We think of him writing by candlelight, walking by the river, observing the industry of a city, or looking out from his farm at the peaceful American countryside. These are the images that endure the thinker, the observer, the craftsman of words. His greatest skill was translation, taking the complex philosophies of the Enlightenment and rendering them into common sense, a language of the hearth and the home. As our own day turns to evening and the light grows long and soft, we can consider the quiet power of ideas. How a single thought, clearly expressed, can travel from mind to mind. How it can build a consensus for change without a single shot being fired in its name. The story of Thomas Paine reminds us that revolution can begin not on a battlefield, but in the calm space of reason, on a page waiting to be read. It is a gentle legacy, one that values intelligence and persuasion over force. It is a legacy written not in the stone of monuments, but in the living, breathing practice of liberty. And so, we leave him there, in the peaceful landscape of memory. A man who arrived with little, who gave his words freely, and who helped to articulate the hopes of a new world. The fire of his passion has long since cooled into the warm glow of history. The arguments are settled. The nation he helped define endures. Now, all that remains is the quiet, the soft light of a setting sun on old brick and parchment, and the enduring echo of common sense, as simple and as necessary as the air we breathe. Let that thought be a peaceful one, a gentle close to our story, as the world outside your window grows dark and still.